Hi guys, welcome to Real Food Recovery. How are you doing, Jamie? What's happening with you today?
Doing okay, doing okay.
Good. We have got a topic today that is often woven deeply into the journey of recovery from ultra-processed food addiction, and
Yes.
that is healing past trauma. And I for one, am actually grateful we're talking about this today for personal reasons. But for many of us, our relationship with food isn't just about hunger or cravings, it's about emotions, past wounds, and unresolved pain that we carry with us. And sometimes I don't think we even realize that it's happening. But the question becomes, how do you know when these past traumas are truly healed? How do you measure that? I would have no idea if I hadn't studied up on this a little bit more. And the other question is, what is the best way to approach that healing process? And if you're wondering the same things like I was, stick around because this may be a good episode for you as well.
Yeah, this is an important conversation because many of us find that unresolved trauma can fuel our behaviors around food, emotions, and even our relationships. And sometimes we think we've healed, but triggers can still pop up, or we might feel unsure about what healing looks like. So we want to start by helping to define what trauma actually is. It's an emotional response to distressing or disturbing events that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness, a diminished sense of self, and often an ability to fully process the trauma. This event can result from a single thing or repeated prolonged exposure to stressful situations, and it often has lasting effects on emotional, physical, and mental well-being.
I know. I thought that was so interesting. And I think that bears going into a little more detail and breaking it down. For me, I thought breaking it down into like three main categories was helpful for me to understand a little more clearly about how trauma is defined. One of them, the first category is like emotional intensity. Trauma involves intense emotions like fear, shame, helplessness, or loss of control, like Jamie mentioned. So that's one. Another one is just complete and overwhelming experience where the individual feels unable to manage the event at the time and the experience exceeds their coping mechanism, which that was familiar to me because I've been in that situation where it's almost like da 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 da, nothing's happening, and I just go like to a different place in my mind. And the other one is lasting impact. Trauma can lead to this long-term symptoms like anxiety, depression, dissociation, where you disconnect from reality as a safety mechanism, not to lose your marbles. That really defines me very well, just kind of checking out. And then there's those physical symptoms that affect a person's ability to live life normally. Do you think that you have, does any of that sound familiar to you? Like, if you experience, as I've kind of described that, anything you want to talk about with something in your life
Yeah,
where that
I,
sounds familiar?
I don't. So yeah, I've had lots of trauma in my life, and I've had all three of those experiences for sure, for sure. That's why I think it's important that we're talking about this topic, right? Because there's lots of ways trauma can manifest in our lives.
Yeah, and I don't you think it helps people to know that I'm not alone here? Other people have experienced this
Yeah,
as well.
definitely.
Yeah, I think trauma is so interesting, and I'm glad we have the opportunity to break it down even further into like little t traumas and big T traumas because I didn't understand that in the beginning either. Several years ago, I heard that expression, little t and big T, and I had never thought about that before. And I think it under helps with understanding because if I think back to my early memories when someone was being mean to me on the playground or the boy in the fourth grade called me ugly to my face, and I loved him dearly but he was mean to me. And those left some scars. And at the time, as a kid, what are you supposed to do with it? You don't have tools. You don't know what you're supposed to do. All I ever knew was just, okay, I'm just going to shrug this off. It still hurt me, but I just thought you're supposed to, in air quotes, deal with it and move on because kids are just going to be kids, right? And unfortunately, my idea was dealing with it meant just shove it down as far as you can get it so you can't reach it and it will never come up again and don't ever think about it. And that's really normal, right? So obviously it's not because it's left an impact on me. I still, from time to time will think about those events that happened over 50 years ago. So I guess you could call those small t traumas because they're not causing me big disturbances in my life, but I have had, the divorce, the heartbreak, the betrayal, and family crisis. And those all fall into that big T trauma category. So I appreciate being able to separate them in my mind as a way to deal
Yes.
with them.
Mhm.
And luckily, I am just ultra slow processor. And so there's a gift in that it kind of mutes those emotions till I can have a minute to figure out what I even think about this. Although one problem with me is I do find myself sometimes staying in that thinking spot and not moving past the thinking phase. Years later, I may still be just still trying to wrap my head around something because I don't know what else I'm supposed to do with it. And it's important to remember that trauma is subjective. That was another big aha for me. What may be traumatizing for one person might not affect someone else in the same way, as trauma is influenced by someone's personal history, their resilience, an available support system. And I have found something that happens to me might be similar to someone else, a family member, and it may completely undo them. And I'm still able to keep my wits about me. So I do think our wiring, how we come to this earth, kind of pre-wired, how we perceive things makes a big difference too.
Yes. So again, if we think about starting with the big question, how do you know when your past traumas are healed? Healing is not always an easy thing to quantify. It's not like waking up one day and realizing, oh, I'm healed now. It's a gradual process, and often we don't notice the changes until we look back and see how far we've come. Here are some signs, though, that indicate you're moving forward and have reached a place of healing. Paige, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think one of the things is your triggers lose their power. A key sign that past traumas are starting to heal is when things that once triggered those deep emotional responses, whether it's anxiety, anger, or sadness, they start to lose that intensity a little bit. It doesn't mean that you'll never be triggered again, but these emotional reactions become less overwhelming, and you find it easier to regain your emotional balance. You bounce back a little bit easier. I have a family member who lost a spouse a few years ago, and that spouse had suffered for a decade or more with a lot of health problems. And every conversation that I'd had with my family member after their spouse passed, lots of tears, lots of not hysteria, but just tears and a lot of conversation around the passing. And but I noticed that after a year, maybe a little bit more, there was a little bit less conversation, less tears. We were able to have a conversation just more like you and I are talking now. And even though I didn't really understand the process at that time, I vividly remember thinking, I think they're getting better. I just had that thought on my own. I think that this is must be what it looks like to get better. And I know when my husband was very sick and we thought we would lose him, I had a hard time choking back tears during conversations on that topic. But now I've noticed that I do still choke up pretty easily, but it's not quite as intense, and I can get through a conversation a little better. I'm not perfect at it, but it does not have that piercing, stabbing like it did in the beginning. So, what are some other signs that you can think of?
You have more compassion towards yourself. Trauma often leaves us with feelings of shame, guilt, or self-blame. As you heal, you begin developing a sense of self-compassion. You forgive yourself for the ways you've coped with your pain in the past, including when we used food, right, as that coping mechanism, and you no longer judge yourself so harshly. So I think that's important to talk about, right? So when you mentioned, the little boy in school who was mean to you, and all these other little T's and big T's. I think, it's important for parents to help their children process the feelings, right? And hopefully the children feel safe enough with the parent to talk to them about it, or some
Right.
teacher, parent, coach, someone that they feel comfortable
Yeah.
sharing what happened. And it's not always the parent. Sometimes it's a timing thing, and there's a teacher closer than there is a parent. But that's important for that um whoever that trusted person is in their life, that child's life, to help them identify what they're feeling, understand that the feelings are not there to overwhelm them, that the feelings are safe, the feelings are just, again, giving them, um, they're to be paid attention to, but not to be sort of engulfed by. And then to process the emotions in a healthy way, right? So letting that go, reminding them of, that's why I think it's so critical that parents or people in kids' lives remind them of who they are in God's eyes, and who they are, what the truth is, the big T truth is about them.
Yeah.
And to be able to let all of that other stuff go. And when they're able to, when a parent or guardian is able to do that for a child, then they will grow up with those core beliefs, and they'll have a much easier time processing events, and understanding where they are, and that, other people's choices and actions and outcomes of life don't dictate their own outcome and their own worth. So again, I think it's something that for many people on this planet, and I've seen probably 0.01% of parents really capable of doing this for their children, which is sad. But there's so much there that can help a child process things, so that as they're adults, they're able to remember, okay, this is a really, junky day, or this is a really bad situation, or a really, sad loss. But I'm okay because I know who I am in God's eyes, and I know that these feelings I have will pass, and they're not going to define me, and I'm not going to allow them to define me. I'm not going to lose myself in them. But I'm going to acknowledge them and let them go. So again, it's just, that's the most compassionate thing that you can give yourself as an adult, is to go back and reparent those areas of trauma that you had as a child, and to talk to yourself in a way that you wished a parent, guardian, teacher, coach would have done. And that can heal those areas, and then we are able to move forward.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That was probably encapsulates everything that we'll talk about today. And I wish I, as a child, had a little more maturity under my belt to even think to go tell my parents. And I'm wondering, is it the parent's job then to just kind of pepper the kid each day and say, how was school today? What's going on? Making sure
Well, yeah,
that,
I mean, it's going to matter for how the parent shows up for the child. Like, if the child feels emotionally safe with that parent, or if the child feels like it's an environment that they can share in, right? Which again, it happens that parents create um, environments that don't feel safe for children, right? It happens.
huge,
Um, but the goal is to create a safe environment so the child feels safe,
right?
or that vulnerability in that child is encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability and resilience are
Totally.
are rewarded, not punished.
Right. And I do think some kids, like I was weird in that I got in trouble so much with my ADHD that I didn't know, okay, am I going to be in trouble for this? So
Right.
maybe I
Yep.
better just pipe down.
Right. Yep.
So huge, huge talking point. Thank you for bringing that up. Another area is when you realize that you stop numbing or avoiding feelings. Many people turn to ultra processed foods to numb or distract themselves from uncomfortable emotions tied to trauma. So when you start to heal, you become more comfortable sitting in those emotions, sitting with your emotions instead of trying to avoid them. You no longer need food or other coping mechanisms to cover up your feelings. You learn to face them with resilience. So, if avoiding feelings and living in hotel denial were ever an Olympic sport, then I would be a gold medal winner because I have become expert at working hard to not be in the company of pain and sweeping it under the rug. But I do think that through recovery, I've learned that just sitting in the discomfort and realizing it will pass has been a very enlightening experience, actually. And my big takeaway is that it's never really as bad as you drummed up in your head. And it's actually just easier to just think about the past experience and talk it out in your mind, whether it be telling yourself you're safe now or you can't hurt, no one can hurt you anymore, or as Jamie mentioned, looking at it with compassion and righting any wrongs if applicable.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
do you agree with that?
Yes.
It's just easier than what you drum up. I think so too.
You feel more in control of your life. Trauma often leaves us feeling powerless or out of control. As healing takes place, you begin to regain that sense of personal agency. You feel like you can make choices for yourself based on what you truly want and need rather than out of fear, avoidance, or habit. You are no longer reacting to life, you're living it intentionally. Not to mention the physical signs of healing. Trauma often shows up in our bodies: lightness in the chest, stomach issues, chronic pain. When those symptoms ease up, it's a good sign that our nervous system is starting to feel safe again.
Another one is you reconnect with your body. And this is, I thought, a really interesting one because trauma can disconnect you from your body, leading to that loss of trust in yourself and your body's natural signals. So as you heal, you begin to listen to your body again, whether it's through food, movement, or just simply rest. You begin to feel at home in your own skin rather than at war with yourself. And I love this talking point so much because one of the things we talk about a lot in RFR is learning to trust yourself. That's one of the big payoffs of recovery. And that only comes through this repeated practice of keeping yourself safe, especially in the face of these highly cueing situations. And you have more and more opportunities for success in warding off a binge or a trigger food. I think that really invites self confidence in all areas of our life, not just with recovery, but everything you touch, and more specifically in healing past trauma. I think this happens because you can clearly see how much you have grown and
Mhm.
developed through your recovery. And if you're looking back at the past, you may recognize that you were not fully prepared at that time or didn't have these mature skills set to handle that situation that you were in. And I think that's the kindest part of healing in trauma is that you can look back and realize how underprepared you were in elementary school to handle a bullying experience, for example, or a first relationship, a first job, or any form of abuse, let alone an unexpected crisis. So, Jamie, you kind of touched on this already, but I really would love to hear your thoughts if you think this is kind of the crux of where the compassion comes from, too, just the realizing how underprepared you are for these situations that
Yeah,
come up in life.
yeah, I agree. Yes. And I think that's uh again, that's why we're able to, and I think it's critical for us to go back and do some of that reparenting, right? Because we have to be
Brilliant.
careful to remind ourselves that we didn't have all the tools back then, but we do now, right? So you can give yourself that closure as an adult. So let's talk about how we measure healing. This is important for us to understand that healing isn't just about forgetting or pretending that things didn't happen or shoving it down or pushing under a rug. It's about integration, right? Making peace with it so it doesn't control our thoughts and behaviors anymore. So again, this can be tricky because everyone's journey is different. And this is something that, in my recovery, I spent a solid year working, and that was just a solid year learning about the tools, and then from there it's applying the tools. But a
Mhm.
solid year in, my childhood healing journey, working through the traumas, working through, taking things back out of the old places that I'd put them in, examining them and rehealing them, and then putting them away from a healed perspective. And I'm able to now, very quickly kind of address the situations that as they come up, and give myself the tools, use the tools I need to give myself what I need, or those parts of me what I need. So again, if this is something where I would recommend for those of you who are interested in this sort of parts work, or some of this healing aspect of adult, child healing, that would be, we have episodes all around the parts work and loving all parts of ourselves. So the first thing that we'll look at is really patterns, right? So one way we measure our healing is to observe patterns in our emotional and behavioral responses. Are we reacting to old triggers less frequently? Do you find yourself tuning in to food for comfort less often? Are you experiencing less intrusive thoughts, memories of trauma? Of course, they will still surface for some, but it's not like they're consuming you or
Yeah.
causing intense distress. So,
Mhm.
one of these things that many people will find their way into, with the help of a licensed therapist, is, EMDR, or their trauma techniques and tools that therapists have, where you literally recatalog that trauma back to where it needs to be in your brain, not front and center anymore. And they can do that through, the eye movement desensitization protocol. And that literally, actually rewires your brain, right? Through using your eyes, it rewires your brain as you're bringing up that memory. There's lots of now very interesting research being done around psychedelics and how psychedelics and use of psychedelics can help people with trauma, especially used in veterans communities and PTSD situations where you've got someone who comes back from, combat theater and they truly can't function in life because their trauma is right in front of their memory. So you have, again, through guided journeys with psychedelics, you've got a lot of veterans using and finally being able to function in life because they've been able to let go of or put
Mhm.
back in its appropriate place in their brains these memories. And there's a lot that can happen on some of these psychedelic journeys around, dying to the old self, dying to the old beliefs. And it's literally a punctuation mark that these people who do these experiments and treatments will have, they will literally feel like that person that lived those experiences, those highly traumatizing experiences. And we're talking about medical personnel, combat personnel, people who are in, even survivors of near-death experiences. Those kinds of healing journeys happen because they literally allow that old part of them, that old person to sort of die. That person that had experienced all of those harmful things allows the psychedelic journey allows that part of them, that part of their psyche to die.
Wow.
So they're able to look back with love or nostalgia of that person who they were, but they no longer allow those things to control them. There's just a lot here around the psychedelic, guided psychedelic journeys and guided
Right.
psychedelic
Guided.
treatments that are very, very helpful, especially for survivors of consistent or really severe trauma.
Is that the ketamine therapy that you're talking about?
That's one. There's many others that are more mainstream, but yeah, this is something that a lot of the psychology field is getting more, I think, more versed in. And again, there's a lot of people that want nothing to do with it, and there's a lot they're talking more and more about it. So I would say if, for me, I had a childhood ACE score, right? Adverse childhood experiences. My score is almost a 10 out of 10. So you have a lot of, things that would benefit for me, benefited from healing right through my adult child work and my parts work. But there's a lot of folks that are adults and they experience significant trauma. How do you, as an adult, who might not have the tools as a child, grew up into an adult without the tools and then experience trauma, right? And, maybe they're in the military or they're, whatever the reason is. And they're having these experiences that they can't put away, that they can't
Mhm.
move past from, right? And it can keep them from getting jobs, keeping jobs,
Yeah.
being functional members of society. So there's a lot of new research around the psychedelic, the use of psychedelics, again, in a very, very guided, very controlled environment. The use of psychedelics can be very helpful for folks struggling with addictions, and PTSD related to, adult experiences.
So, you make a good point about, let's say you had one of those opportunities for that therapy. What they would do is take you back to a childhood experience that allowed you to,
EMDR, yes.
yeah, that kind of allows you to re-look at that experience from a different perspective to make peace with it so you can move past that kind of frozen state around it.
Yes. Well, and it literally just recatalogs it in the right spot instead of closer to the front of the catalog. It puts it back where it belongs.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would love to know more about that. Thank you for sharing that. Another one is when we come to measuring healing is emotional resilience. How quickly do you bounce back from difficult emotions? Healing doesn't mean you're never going to feel sadness again, anger, or anxiety, but it does mean you're going to be better equipped to handle those emotions when they do arise. You'll notice that you can move through emotional challenges without feeling they control you. For example, you stop avoiding places, people, or situations that remind you of the trauma because you no longer feel controlled by the fear or discomfort. A few years ago, I was playing tennis. My mom was on the court playing tennis next to where I was playing, and she was backpedaling to go for this overhead lob. And as she was backpedaling, she kind of was twisting at the same time, and I think she got caught up on her feet, and she tripped, and she lost her orientation when she was falling, which direction she was moving. So she didn't reach out, and she fell. Her arms weren't reached out in the right direction, and it hit her head. The head hit the tennis court, and she ended up with a brain bleed, and it knocked her out of course, and there's a big pool of blood on the courts, and I had gone to the parking lot already to leave, and somebody ran and got me in, and I came back in, and seeing my mother face down in that situation, that was extremely traumatic for me. Plus, I don't remember the exact term, but she lost her memory. When she woke up, she asked me what happened. I told her, and she goes, "Oh, okay, what happened?" And then I told her, and she goes, "Oh, okay, what happened?" So I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, this isn't good." By the third time of that, that's not good. So they had to call the ambulance, and she was in the hospital for a while till we could get everything straightened out. But that was very traumatic for me. Again, I wasn't prepared for that situation in my life or that site. And there was a stain on that tennis court, and I would have to walk by it going to my tennis court. And that bothered me. I had a very visceral reaction to that for a long time. And I remember thinking, can we just go to a different court? I just need to get rid of that stomach pain whenever I pass that spot. But as time has gone on, I've gotten better at moving through those emotions as I've gotten older and more mature. And the thing that I think has helped me most is that self-talk around whatever situation it is. That has really become my best friend. Just having this real conversation with yourself of the reality of the situation. That happened then. She's okay now. You did everything you could to be responsible, to take care of it. This is life. And hopefully, for me anyway, that seems to comfort me more than anything else, just the self-talk around what
Mhm.
the situation was. I don't know if you want to add on to any of
Yep.
that.
Nope. Nope. That's true. Relationships also can improve, right? That's another example of healing. Trauma can also create barriers in relationships, whether family, friends, or yourself. As you heal, you'll find that your relationships become healthier and more open and supportive. And this is a strong indicator of your internal world healing. Yep, that's absolutely been my experience as well.
So we've talked a lot about different things, and one of the big question is what's the best way to heal trauma? Jamie's mentioned a few. We've talked a little bit about some other ideas. And one thing that we want to make sure to point out is we're not saying there's one size fits all with
No.
everybody, but there's a few key approaches that can be incredibly helpful, especially for those of us that are recovering from the ultra processed food, from the effects of those. One thing that we know is seeking professional support, someone who specializes in trauma, working with a therapist, a counselor, or again, a trauma specialist can be one of the most effective ways to heal trauma. A trained professional can help you process those deeper wounds in a safe and supportive environment. And at
Yes.
Real Food Recovery, we believe in a multi-pronged approach, and we always are open to feeling like professionals can help and be a wonderful supplement to what we do if we feel like something's outside our scope. So that is one option.
Yep. Another is to practice mindfulness and body awareness. Trauma disconnects us from our bodies, right? So healing comes through that reconnection, practicing mindfulness, movement, meditation, yoga, breath work can help tune back into our body. and what's going on inside. Learning to observe our emotions without judgment can also help us break free from the patterns of numbing or avoidance. Again, this is, a critical part of what we teach in RFR.
Yeah, also allow yourself to feel. A huge part of healing trauma is learning to allow yourself to feel whatever comes up. And I keep thinking about what you were talking about with these different therapies for people, soldiers or whatever, who or children that have had these huge traumas in your life. That has to be terrifying to allow themselves to feel. Why would you want to do that? I'm sure in a mind that is so tender and hurting, that would have to be absolutely terrifying to think, okay, I'm just going to feel this. So if you can try to learn to feel things without fear, that
Mm-hmm.
can really be helpful. Um, and if you've spent years programming yourself of how to bury those emotions, like I did, and become a professional at that, and especially using food, then those are hard patterns to break. But we do know that the only way out is through. And when you give yourself permission to feel sadness, anger, grief, fear, you also allow these emotions to pass on through rather than staying stuck inside your body. And I'm going to add one more emotion that might sound a little crazy at first, but I was extremely ADHD as a kid. Boredom was my worst enemy, and honestly, it still is today. But luckily, I have the skills to counterbalance it now. But as a child, I felt like I was coming out of my skin. Literally, it was physical pain being inside my body, just with all this pent up energy. If I had to stay put, we would take these 12-hour car rides to visit family. That was our source of vacation when I was a kid. And this sounds so dramatic, but it felt like torture to me sitting in the station wagon, just sitting there. I mean, we didn't have electronics back then. I mean, there's only so much coloring you can do. And I would start sometimes just counting how many seconds in a minute. Okay, how many more minutes do we have? How many more hours? Just to give my brain was in agony. And as I got older and more on my own, food was my first go-to when I was bored. And that, like if it's a snow day, I freak out a little bit because I always go back to those teenage years of snow day and let's make muffins and hot chocolate. And gradually I've learned coping skills for that. But I just wanted to point out that boredom actually felt like trauma as an out of control, hyperactive kid confined to a seat. And quite frankly, it still feels a little traumatic if I'm bored and in a situation that I can't escape, that I get a little panicky about
Yeah.
that. So,
So instead of turning to ultra processed foods, we want to reframe our narrative, right? So, or I'm sorry, we want the cultivate a healthy coping mechanism. So when we're in that pain, starting to cultivate other ways to soothe and nourish ourselves. So we talked about this a while ago. Anything we can do to get back in our bodies, to change our location, go for a walk, or start to do some writing, or reaching out to someone you trust that is safe for you. Engaging in creative activities, art, music, writing can help you process emotions in a healthier way. Those all have worked for me for sure.
do you have a favorite?
Uh, no, it really depends on the day and the need.
Yeah, and the mood, how you
Mhm.
feel.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that. The last one is you can reframe your narrative. I touched on this a little earlier, but healing trauma isn't just about letting go. It's about rewiring the story of your life. And I like how Jamie put it with cataloging, that you catalog it to its appropriate space in your brain. I'd never thought about it from that perspective, but
Mhm.
I really like that visual. That I I'm a visual learner, so that really makes sense to me. Um, so, if you can rewrite the story of your life, that really does help with coping. And often trauma leaves us with this sense of being broken or damaged. But as you heal, you can start to see your story in a new light. And isn't that the goal, to just start looking at your story from a different perspective? Your trauma is part of your journey, but it doesn't define you. You can reclaim your power and move forward with a sense of strength and purpose. And again, this is our greatest asset, in my opinion. We aren't rewriting history, just the way we look at history. So, time and distance gives us perspective we might not have had previously.
Yeah. So everyone listening today who's on this journey, if you want to remember that healing from trauma is possible, it just takes time and patience, and again, courage. But you can get there, whether your trauma stems from your past relationships with, again, situations and memories, could certainly connect to food, childhood experiences that you've had that you're kind of stuck on, or something else. It's possible to heal. And when you do, you'll find a freedom that's deeper than anything a diet or quick fix can offer.
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you for talking this out today. I just think this was a really profound topic, and I appreciate those who are listening. And remember, you've got to be gentle with yourself as you go through this process because it is a process. Healing is not a race, it is a journey. And every step you take towards healing, no matter how small, it's worth celebrating and recognizing I am making a little bit of progress here. So we've got time for a few listener questions. Jamie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. How do I know if a trigger is from unresolved trauma or just a normal reaction? So again, I would say if it's very deep, right, you'll notice it. If it's the best way to describe it is if it's a hockey stick, right? So if the way that you're reacting to something feels like it's from 0 to 100, there's some unresolved trauma. And I'm very, you're not only good at noticing that in myself because I'm more self-aware now, but also noticing it in others, right? So when I see someone, if I bring something up and somebody goes from, 0 to 100 or gets very, very upset very quickly, then I know that it's not what I'm talking about. There's something bigger here. And I just let them do what they need to do to work through that. And I just kind of step back.
Stay out of the way of
Mhm.
the hockey stick.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. The next one is, can you really heal without therapy? I don't have insurance to cover a therapist. So therapy is a fantastic tool. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but it's not the only path. Some people find healing through self-help books, support groups, or spiritual practices. The key is to find out what works for you. We talked about earlier about how situations are, everyone responds differently to situations. So that would mean it's true for everyone heals differently. So for me, when I can educate myself around the situation, I can think it through, process it, and lots of spiritual involvement for me in my process, that helps me more than anything, turning to God and saying, I I don't know what to do here. You got to show me the way, guide me and direct me. There, even if the answer doesn't come immediately, that just provides comfort for my soul that no, and I know that we're in the process of figuring out what to do next, what the next right move is for me.
What do I do if someone close to me is the source of my trauma? Uh, well, there's a couple different things. You have to look at that relationship, right? So you have to look at that relationship, and understand where those traumas are. Are they current? Or are they from the past? And then, again, that's where I would employ, if this is someone that let's say that this is a parent or a spouse or a child, someone that you can't just cut ties with, then you need to do a lot of work around, and this is where, in my experience, 12-step work comes in handy because it's prolonged exposure to healing modalities and tools that people can use to deal with people in their lives who are sick, right? If somebody is in your life that you can't break from, is traumatizing you, uh still, then there is a strong indication that this is somebody who's very sick, right? So that you have to do something for yourself that puts you in a situation to give you the tools to deal with that sick person. There are other schools of thought that will tell you to, break ties with those people until they get the help they need. And that could apply to, potentially, but that would be, again, strong recommendation to reach out to someone who is a therapist, or again, find yourself into your way into a 12-step group with, there's either 12-step groups around codependency or 12-step groups around, relationships with, and being in relationships with folks who have addiction. This is just the nature of that healing that needs to happen for you, right? And the theme around that is to take care of you and allow that person the dignity to do and live their lives
Yeah.
and not try to change them, but to take care of you and to take care of your needs. And to leave that other person and their illness and their sickness that they're trying to hurt you with, leave them up to God.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. Good point. That's such a hard one. That's such a hard one. So the last one is, does my nutrition really make a difference when trying to heal from trauma? I don't see the connection. I thought that was a good question.
Mhm.
Healing from trauma doesn't mean you're never going to be sad or triggered. So it just means that you have the tools to cope and the resilience to bounce back. And one of those tools we use when recovering from the effects of ultra processed food use is nourishing our body with clean single ingredient foods, because here's the big part, they help stabilize your mood and energy, which is key in emotional healing. And if you're in deep in the food, it is a huge distraction and it takes you out of life, and you can't address situations like you normally do if you didn't have that distraction and the pool of processed foods that are preoccupying your mind. So that there is the connection with that. It
Yeah,
just puts you on solid footing.
yeah,
It helps keep you on solid footing to do the
agreed.
work that needs to be done. Anything else you want to add? I think
No,
this has been great.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you want to find out more about us, you can find us at realfoodrecovery4u.com. That's the number 4 and the letter U, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye bye.
Thank you.